Okay, good morning. Morning. My name is Kimberly Kenyon. I am an underwater archaeologist and a conservator. So most of the time today you've been talking about natural resources. I'm here to talk to you about a cultural resource. What do you think that means? No? Well, a cultural resource much of the time deals with archaeology, but it's something that a person or a people or a culture put there. So it's not wildlife, it's not all these natural things you might incur, it's something man-made. And one of the most important cultural resources we find here in North Carolina is Blackbeard's own flagship, the Queen's Revenge. I work for the Office of State Archaeology for the state government. So part of my job is to help excavate this very important cultural resource and bring it to the museum so that all of you can appreciate it and learn more about your history here in North Carolina. So to start with, I'm sure you've all heard the name Blackbeard. Who was Blackbeard? Exactly. He was the most famous pirate in the history of piracy, right? Everyone has heard this name. He was a legendary figure. But what we don't often think about is that he was a real human being that lived in the 1700s. We don't know much about his history. There are a lot of different historians who study piracy and try to get a feel for who this person was and what kind of life he lived. Unfortunately, they didn't really take very good records back then. We don't have birth certificates. We don't have, marriage licenses, those kind of things. So a lot of these clues we have to pick up on by different people writing down their own stories and accounts. So one story is that he might have been English. He might have been from a city called Bristol. Another historian recently thought that he might have been the son of a plantation owner from Jamaica. So we really don't know much about who he was as a person, other than who he was as a legendary figure, as this pirate with such a tremendous reputation. So in 1717, Blackbeard was cruising the Caribbean with his fleet, and he came across a ship. That ship's name was called La Concorde. It was a French slave ship. The French were known to trade slaves quite readily from the West African coast into the New World. So it was on this voyage, the ship had about 500 slaves on board. The pirates engaged it because it was a large ship. The slave ships were built to be fast and large. They could carry a lot of people and they could get them there as quickly as possible to be sold. It was a horrible part of human history. So Blackbeard and his crew attacked this French ship and took it for their own. They did give the French crew a smaller ship, and they made their way back to France where they had to testify as to what happened to their ship. It's a large ship with a valuable cargo of slaves. Of course, the owner of the ship and the merchant wanted to know what happened. What did you do? Well, he didn't really do anything. It wasn't his fault. So Blackbeard happened to be there. He took this ship and over the next few months sailed it up to what is now the east coast of the United States. He stopped in Charleston. We know that he laid siege to the city. Apparently a lot of his crew had been sick, so he laid siege to the city so that he could get a chest of medicine to help cure his crew. So after a few days, he finally got that and moved on to Beaufort, North Carolina. And you know where Beaufort is? Have you been to Beaufort? Have you been in the museum in Beaufort and seen some of Blackbeard's artifacts? You should go. So in 1718, he, for whatever reason, only about 6 months after the time that he captured the ship, he ran it aground off of Beaufort. We don't know whether it was on purpose. Some people say that he'd been granted a pardon by the governor if he would agree to go live an honest life, get out of piracy, stop attacking people's ships. We know that he didn't do that, and he was killed shortly after. But for whatever reason, he ran his ship aground on a sandbar outside of Beaufort Inlet. About 300 years or so later, in 1996, the shipwreck was found again. After all this time, it's broken down and settled into the ocean. So it took us a long time to figure out where it went and what ship it was. So to give you a little bit of perspective, we're in Greenville here. The Queen's Revenge is about a mile offshore of Beaufort. We're very near Fort Macon. If you've been near Fort Macon or been on the beach there, you can probably look straight out, and I'm sure you've seen exactly where we are. So, about the excavation itself. Underwater archaeology is very different from what you may have seen with land archaeology. We still use a lot of the same principles, but with the water in the way, it gets a lot more tricky to excavate a site that's in the ocean. Now we know that Blackbeard ran his ship aground on a sandbar, so much of the ship was exposed for a very long time after he ran it aground. But over the years, because the sandbars shift, they move, and a lot of the shipping lanes have been dug through there, the sands have shifted. So now it's in 25 feet of water. This is not incredibly easy to access. The visibility is usually really terrible. If you hold your hand about here in front of your face, that's about all you can see on any given day. The water in Beaufort Inlet is not the cleanest, clearest water in the world. So to start with, every morning we need a boat, because we're out a mile offshore, so we need a boat to start. We borrow one from a different organization. We don't own one that's big enough to do this. We have a crew of about 12 divers. We all load up all of our gear on the boat. We sail out a mile offshore, moor up, and then we can use this nice barge as a dive platform. So we'll stay there all day, get as much as we can done unless the visibility just disappears or the currents get really strong or the winds get really strong, and then we'd have to leave, or hopefully we can stay out there until dark, but usually it's 6 or so hours on the water. We come back in, we have to do all the paperwork and all the processing. So you're looking at about a 14-hour day from about 6 a.m. until 6 p.m., all of the day just working away. We do wear a little bit of special equipment. You'll get to see that outside. Because it's in the water, obviously we wear wetsuits. We usually dive in the fall, so the water's a little bit warmer after having been warmed up throughout the summer. It is hurricane season, however, so we have to keep close watch on weather patterns that come through. So we wear wetsuits to protect our bodies. We're usually in the water for about an hour, depending on how fast you breathe a tank. Everyone is different in their lung capacity and how quickly they breathe. So we all go down together, make sure that we're on a buddy system. We make sure that no one's down there alone. We wear your typical dive setup, fins, your vest called a buoyancy control device. It's inflatable and helps you control your body in the water. We wear a regulator to help us breathe. The thing that you might notice is different is the masks that this diver is wearing. Have you ever seen a mask like this? It's a little bit different, a little more technical. This mask covers your whole face. So it's kind of nice because in this type of mask, you can breathe through your nose. It's a weird concept being in the water and actually being able to breathe through your nose instead of through your mouth into this regulator. But this mask not only lets us breathe a little more freely, but it also has communications. So you can push a button in your chin and you can talk to the divers around you and you can talk to whoever's on the surface. So there are some days when this has been a really important feature for us to be able to use, not only in making sure your buddy is nearby if you can't see very far, but there have been times when a diver may have gotten lost and you can call up to the surface and say, hey, has anyone seen my bubbles? Can anyone help me figure out where I am? So it's a really nice tool for us to use. And then this diver is getting ready to head down and do his day's work. Now this is typically what it looks like on the seabed in Beaufort Inlet. The one in the upper corner here, that very green water, you see a lot of things hanging in it. It's called particulate. It's things that get washed in, maybe pollutants. That's kind of scary for us to think about as divers in this water. All of this silt from the inlet pours in, and it fluctuates quite a lot with the tides. So usually at high tide, when the tide's coming in, we have better visibility. As soon as it's washing back out, it washes all the sand with it, and it gets really gross. So that's typical. You may be able to see your hand, you can see your gauge. On a very good day, you can see about 5 feet. But I've been down there some days where it's just pitch black, and you have to kind of go by braille. You have to feel along and figure out where you are. The lower picture is a much better day. And you can see these lumps of material. This is on site. There's nothing in this area, in the inlet here, that is naturally occurring that looks like that. So when we run across something like this, it kind of looks like a rock or coral or something. We know that it's actually not natural. We do know that it was put there as part of the shipwreck itself. So anytime we run across this, we know that we have to gather it up. It's important for us to study. So the next stage, once we find the wreck, and it's a little tricky. We do have GPS coordinates, but we have to do a little bit of searching at the beginning of the season and set our moorings. The first step is to set up a grid. So we have these black and white grids. That helps us map the site. So each grid square is 5 feet by 5 feet, and a diver will work in that grid square, finding all of these lumps of material, and they have to map them in. They'll take a slate and a pencil down. You can write with a pencil underwater if you didn't know that. It's really fun. You can draw pictures. So we map everything in on our slates. And then once it's mapped in, we can verify that it's correct, then we can start taking things off the seabed. So these divers are in the very early stages of setting up that grid system to make sure that we have checks and balances to map everything in. So what happens once we find something? Well, this is a picture of one of the ship's timbers, one of the actual hull remains of the vessel itself. They're really not found very readily because wood is one of those things, if it's been saturated in seawater for so long, it starts to break down and disintegrate. So we're really, really fortunate that we do occasionally find wood and rope and leather even, organic material like that. It usually breaks down, but we're excited when we find it. So the divers now are mapping it in. They take another measuring tape or a ruler down, map in these huge structures or even small pieces into their slates. They bring all that information to the surface. At the end of the day, we'll double check and draw it on a larger map. So once we know that it's right, and once we've checked it off and made sure that we can raise it, the next step is to carefully package all of these materials and get them off the seabed. Wood, even though it looks pretty substantial, still looks like wood. In a lot of cases can be very, very soft. It's highly degraded, and you notice it doesn't float anymore. It does sink now. It's completely waterlogged. There's more water in that remaining than actual wood. So we have to be very careful in taking these things off the seabed. So they'll pack it in sandbags. We wrap it in a lot of like plastic wrap, bubble wrap, and things like that. We'll package it in a crate, and then we can use a crane or even divers, if it's not too heavy, to lift it up. We use lifting balloons to help us get it off the seabed, and we'll carefully put it on the dive barge. At the end of the day, it goes back to shore with us, and then we have to put it in a tank for storage. Everything that comes off of a shipwreck has to stay wet until it's fully conserved, and then it can be dried out and displayed. So this is the map that we've been able to produce from all this information. Archaeology is a very destructive science, meaning that as we're excavating, we're removing things. So if we don't have this map, we lose all of that information. And every bit of that little spatial information, how things are related, where they came from, that helps us reconstruct the ship itself. Even though there's not a lot of ship left, we can take all of this and help us build an idea of how it was built, maybe who built it, where it went, what kind of culture existed within the pirate community, and what kind of activities were going on in colonial North Carolina at the time. So every bit of this puzzle is incredibly important for us to preserve. So it's a little difficult to see, but all of the red numbered squares on that end of the map are all of the units, the grids that we've excavated now. So most of that material that you're looking at is no longer on the seabed, but because we took such copious notes, we can plot exactly where they came from. All of the blue numbered squares on my end of the map are what we have left to go. So we've got about half of the shipwreck excavated so far. As it comes up, it goes to the lab here in Greenville. If you didn't know that, Blackbeard's shipwreck is preserved right here in your hometown. And then it goes on to the museum in Beaufort. So all of the blue numbered squares away we have left to go. We've got about half the shipwreck up. How many artifacts do you think we found so far? Any guesses? 13. No? How many things do you see on this map here? We've raised over 400,000 artifacts from this shipwreck. So considering we still have half of the ship to go, we could very well have 1 million individual artifacts before we finish. And that'll hopefully give us a much better understanding of the culture in this time period and what was happening in this point of history. Another thing I should point out, what do you think all these black smudges are? They're really... No? Yeah, who said cannon? So those are all the cannon. Those are kind of the most recognizable things that we raise. We've found about 30 cannons so far on this wreck, and that helped us understand this is not just your typical ship. No regular ship would be sailing around with that kind of gunpowder at the time. So the fact that we have 30 cannon helped us identify maybe this is Blackbeard's ship. And then what are the other objects you see here? Anything recognizable? You see the ship's anchors? The anchors are, well, the one anchor we have raised is the largest object we've brought up. You can see it here coming up in 2011. It weighs 2,000 pounds. So it's about a ton. We did have to have help raising that because we don't have anything quite big enough to lift that kind of weight. This is the anchor on the seabed and what it looked like. You can see again that really green, hazy water. So for the larger artifacts, we do have to get some help in raising those. We don't just care about the big artifacts either. Most of our artifacts, in fact, are very, very tiny. So once we get all of the large stuff out of the way, we come in and excavate each grid square using a water induction dredge. So it's like a vacuum cleaner that uses water to create the vacuum instead of air. All of the sediment from a unit down to a certain layer is pumped onto the deck of the barge in these large wooden boxes here. All of it passes through, it spits out all the shells and stuff. We're not interested in shells, unfortunately. No offense to the biologists out there. So we get rid of all the shells and all of the material we're not looking for culturally. But all of the heavier sediment, all the really dark black sand, a lot of the artifacts like lead shot, you know what lead shot is, right? The bullets that are fired out of the guns, we find a lot of that. We find copper sewing pins. Every sailor would have been making his own clothing on board the ship, so we find a lot of these little sewing pins. We also find glass beads, and then our tiniest artifacts are these. What do you think those are? It is gold dust, exactly right. There's an interesting story that when Blackbeard captured the ship, the French cabin boy told him there was a bag of gold dust on board. We know the French used gold dust as a currency, so that in itself was a valuable commodity. We haven't found a lot of it. There's not a lot of real treasure on board, and there's certainly not enough gold dust to fill a whole chest. So it would have been just a little bag. And then so all of this is found. You can see this man here with a gold pan, like you've seen in the movies. We literally pan the sediment down to find these tiny grains of gold. And this picture was taken under a microscope. They're really tiny. Some of the gold is actually smaller than a grain of sand. So here's some of the artifacts, and we do have some outside, so make sure we stop by our table. You can see Blackbeard's real artifacts here today. So some of the most recognizable objects we've had. At the top, you see one of the cannon. It's now been fully cleaned up, so it's everything that comes up is usually covered in that crust, that material. It's called concretion. It's very similar to concrete because it's an aggregate. It has a lot of shells in it. It develops as iron rust in the seawater. So all these cannon, everything were covered in that stuff. So all of these have been finished now. You've got a cannon, a dinner plate, some glass beads that are really tiny, grenades here, some sword parts, a wine bottle, and a cannonball, and even a little shoe buckle. So we never know what we're going to find down there. So y'all have any questions about anything? I saw a hand over here. Oh, okay. I mean, it could be from any point in time. Yeah, you never know. Did you have a question in the back? We only find that when we take the sand back to the lab and look under a microscope at it. So we just make sure all the sand comes with us back to the lab. Okay, well, thank y'all so much.